So today we're going to touch back on the state pension. This is something we've spoken about on the channel before. It's just a topic that just won't go away. And I feel like there's a reason why it will not go away. A lot of this is going to be a lot of foreshadowing, informing of the public of the issues and the challenges that we face with a state pension and foreshadowing what the ultimate outcome is going to be. I don't think this is by any means a mistake. I think this is very much intentional. Now, every time we've covered this on the channel, what I've seen in the comment section is a lot of anger, a lot of frustration, which I completely get. People will blame immigration. I think that this issue with the state pension has been one that has been coming for a very, very long time, for the past 2 to 3 decades, with the government spending recklessly, mismanagement of funds, just inefficiencies within the government. And that far surpasses the impact of illegal immigration on this question. And when we get into the stats section of this video we're going to react to from GB News, which was published 4 days ago, talking about this issue, you'll find that actually there is a place for immigration in solving this state pension problem because of demographic population numbers in the UK currently. But I do want to preface this just by saying that if you're 50, 60 years old, and I know that many of you who are now watching the channel in that age group, this is not going to impact you. This is going to impact people who are of my age group, in their 40s, if you're in your 30s, and certainly if you're in your 20s. The probability is maybe it's not a question of not having a state pension, but they'll probably reduce the state pension quite significantly. So it's not even worthwhile really getting, because they'll reduce it to a point that it will just be a contributory factor to your cost of living, but minuscule, or as they have been reporting quite frequently, means testing the state pension. So let's just jump into this report by GB News, and let's have a look at the opening salvo.
Where getting a job straight out of school or uni, working and paying your taxes and national insurance up until your late 60s, meaning a modest state pension to see you through your retirement, are over, according to one of Britain's top money men. People in their 20s, 30s, and 40s today won't be able to rely on drawing a state pension when they're older, despite still being expected to fund today's pensioners through national insurance and income tax. The money you thought you were accruing for retirement has been spent, says Justin Urquhart Stewart.
Idea was you saved up through the government and it built up a pension pot, and therefore when you actually had a state pension you were drawing down from effectively what you'd already contributed towards. Unfortunately, governments over the years have already taken that money and spent it. So actually what they're having to do is pay pensions out of today's money, not savings to that money. The economic picture for people who are working now, casting forward 20, 30 years ahead, actually most people don't want to look that far ahead because they're frightened about what they may see, and they're quite right to be frightened about it. No one has been able to have the, I suppose, bravery to be able to stand up, or honestly to stand up and say to people, look, be worried, be frightened of this, because this is going to affect us all. You're going to be expecting to work for longer, your returns are going to be lower, and your expectation of being able to then have a happy, solvent retirement, I'm afraid, could just end up being a pipe dream.
So a few points that he's made here, which I completely agree with. Previous governments squandering the money. With the way the state pension is currently funded, we do not have a sovereign wealth fund like Norway, for example, where they have a massive pot of money that basically means that every citizen is covered. The state pension here in the UK is covered by the tax take. And as you'll see a little bit later on, you need a good number of workers to fund a certain number of retirees for the equation to balance out. And unfortunately, we're at that point where the equation simply just does not balance out and is forecast to actually fail in the future. Now, he did mention that people aren't brave enough to stand up and tell people what's going to happen, what is coming down the line. That is true, because what politician is going to stand up and be honest about this? Because it's not an election winning topic, right? We're going to fix the state pension. Well, how? Let's really dig into the details. How? I don't think they even have a clue on how they're going to fix this right now, which is why we need some radical thinking. It's something I've talked about on the channel quite a few times before. We need radical thinking to be able to address these issues, address these potential problems coming down the line, because what this basically ends up in is mass pension poverty. He also mentioned that people need to be looking 20, 30, 40 years into the future. And he is absolutely right. We are not programmed to do that. I remember when I was in my 20s, I was not good about investing, thinking about retirement. I was more interested in going out with my mates, having a good time, pulling some birds. That's all I was interested in. And I think that that is very much the same. And you can't blame people for being in that space. But I think with the advent of social media, channels like mine and other channels that speak on these topics, I truly believe that there is a lot more awareness amongst the 20 odd, 30 odd year olds that they need to do something a little bit earlier and start investing and thinking about retirement sooner rather than later.
For more than 50 years, Britain hasn't produced enough children to replace the people who are dying. We've relied on immigration to plug the gap instead. Back when the state pension came in, there were 5.5 workers paying tax to support every pensioner. Today, there are only 3.6 workers, meaning it's becoming less and less affordable to support so many retirees. By the middle of this century, that number will be down to 2 workers supporting each pensioner. Justin touched on how the NHS will also need to change. Those aged 85 and over require 7 times more care than those in their 40s and below. And the numbers of Brits in this age group has gone up 700% since 1950. Their proportion of the population has soared by 500% and is projected to quadruple again by the end of this century. The government is already spending more than £124 billion a year on the state pension, more than half its total outlay on benefits. To keep the current ratio of pensioners to workers, experts think the state pension age will have to rise to 71 within the next couple of decades.
No, I think that that is 100% a probability. We're already seeing that the state pension is being pushed out. The idea that it goes to 71 is no surprise whatsoever, especially when you consider some of the stats that they just mentioned there. And this dynamic of the population isn't growing fast enough by natural means in terms of childbirth, right? To think that when the state pension was first introduced, there were 5.5 workers to fund retirees. Today, there are 3.6. And at the end of this, in the middle of this century, it's going to be 2 workers for what is, for all intents and purposes, a growing aging population that has grown by 500% and is going to grow even bigger. You can automatically see where this equation is going to be a failing equation in the end. Now, they will get a little bit of headroom and leeway by the fact that they push the state pension age to 71, but I don't think it's going to be enough. And we think about how do we fix this? Well, immigration becomes one of the key things that will help, because if you haven't got enough young people coming up to work, to pay taxes, to fund the state pension, and obviously, I'm not talking about illegal immigration here before anyone jumps down my throat. I'm talking about proper immigration, legal immigration, where people come in and actually want to contribute to society. Unless you do, you have to do that, or you basically encourage family planning, right? Having more kids, incentivize people to have more kids. The issue with that is the world is now moving towards a very, very different space. It's no longer like in the 1950s and 60s, maybe 70s and 80s, where women are at home and that is what they want to do, that they're expected to have children. Women now have the freedom, the ability to build fantastic careers, and that often means that childbearing is pushed out to later ages. There are so many factors that go into this equation, and honestly, it's something again that needs radical thinking to figure out, okay, how do we position this so that our state pension is sustainable for the future? I personally don't think there is anything that they can do to fix this, because I think we're too far gone down the line. But that's just my thinking right there. Let's continue.
Demographer Paul Morland explained this effect a little while back to GB News.
Well, when you have a fall in the birth rate, it feeds through. First of all, you have fewer kids at school and you save on your education bill. Then eventually you have fewer people entering the workforce. Where we are now is we have a rather slender workforce and a rather large number of older people, which is wonderful. We all want to live long and healthy lives. But that's only going to get accentuated over time. And what we really need to look at is the ratio of those retired and those in work. And you can move the retirement date, but that's a fairly minor effect. And as you get more and more old people relative to those who are working, pensions go up, healthcare spend goes up, and the tax take comes down. And so you have more and more people, as it were, at the top end of the age spectrum, sitting on a slenderer and slenderer number of workers. And whatever your ideology and whatever your aspirations, unless you're going to say, we'll give up on the health service, we'll give up on pensions, we'll give up on old people and let them fend for themselves. If they've got kids, good luck. If not, too bad. Unless you're really going to step back from what we, even at a most minimal level, would consider a civilized society, you're going to have to ratchet up that tax rate, regardless of what you're doing on defense or anything else. You have to ratchet and ratchet up that tax rate.
No, I think that's the scary bit when you think about what he's described there. What he's described is effectively a reverse funnel. So with a funnel, you have things going at the top, coming out at the bottom, right? And the ideal scenario is that you have more people at the top working to funnel down to pay the needs of the people at the bottom. So the retirees at the bottom receiving state pension. But what he described there is a reverse funnel where you have more people at the top trying to get money out, but you've not really got enough coming through to be able to go upwards to feed them. A reverse funnel simply does not work. It doesn't flow upwards. A funnel always flows downwards. So the issues that he's articulating there is that you have to do something, because as you don't have the working population to be able to fund this, the only other thing you're going to be able to do, bearing in mind you're still going to have pension tax relief that you're going to have to pay, which we covered that, I think it was a couple of weeks ago. That's costing the government 70 billion a year. It will increase and grow over the number of years moving forward. Then you've got the actual state pension bill of 124 billion a year. That again is going to grow. So the only thing that you're going to be able to do is to ratchet up the tax take on the population to compensate for that. Now, things are already quite painful at the moment in the UK in terms of the tax position. So 5 years, 10 years from now, 2, 3 parliaments away from where we are right now, who is going to come to the general public and say, we're going to increase taxes to try and fix our state pension problem, when the people who are going to have to pay for that in taxes may not be guaranteed a state pension when they get to state pension age, or the state pension age is pushed out so far that they have to work longer to even get the benefit that they're paying for right now. It's completely and utterly counterintuitive.
But depending on the nation's finances and longer lifespans, it could be put up further. Or, as Justin Urquhart Stewart reckons, the entitlement could remain, but the pension you actually receive could be so minimal that you can't rely on it. Or, as has been rumoured, it becomes means tested.
The old rules where you could actually rely upon a pension when you're sort of 65, 66, 67, 70 have gone. Well, they may still be there, but they're going. If they haven't gone, they will be going soon. And it's very unfair because you work hard all your life, and only when you get to retirement, they change the rules. Hang on, why didn't someone tell me this years ago? That is irresponsible behaviour by those politicians of whatever political hue they happen to be. And so we can shout and moan about it, but there's not a great deal in terms of magicking up extra money. If governments, not just in Britain, but elsewhere around the world, don't start taking action on this to make sure that those, as we give this aging population, can actually look after itself, maintain itself, then you're going to find social disruption, economic failure, and a pretty miserable time for those people trying to retire. Action can be taken, and it's not does not mean you're all doomed. But if the government does nothing about this and takes the cowardly way out and not deal with it, it's a problem that's going to still lurk and get worse. If individuals are not going to understand what's going on because no one's told them, and they live in blissful view that I've got a state pension, it's going to be okay, no one dares tell them that it's not okay. And as for the industry itself, I'm afraid they're going to have to grow up and start providing services which are clear, understandable, and good value for those people in the longer term. Not just trying to bet, or even as a significant portion of the population, when I go out and give talks, they think that their future is, it's okay, I do the lottery every week, I'm bound to have a win at some stage.
I have to comment on this point right here, because the amount of times that I've seen in the comment when we talk about the state pension or investing in pensions, the amount of times I see in the comments people say that they are playing the lottery and they would rather do that than pay into a private pension or invest money. The amount of times I see that is mind boggling to me, and it's really, really worrying and quite troubling. If most people think like that, which I don't think they do, we as a country are absolutely screwed. Now, he talked about the fact that no one's really talking about this, no one's really being warned. Maybe at governmental level, you're not being warned, but you are being warned. This right here is a warning. This right here is a heads up to say you need to pull your socks up, you need to get your head right, and you kind of need to pay attention to this stuff right now because no one is coming to save you. But the reality is, and I agree with what he's saying here, is the government needs to do something. We need radical thinking. We need something to change in order for this system not to be the case. What I think we're moving towards, especially on the NHS and health side, is we're heading towards private medical insurance. Because you fast forward to the middle of the century where we've got so many more elderly people in the system. The NHS, if not well funded, and how is it going to be funded? Through the tax take, which means an increase in tax, which people are not going to be happy with. If the NHS is not well funded, it's going to collapse. It's not going to be. It's going to be non-existent. So these are existential problems that are facing the nation, that are facing future generations ultimately, and we are being warned about it right now. The question that I know the answer to, which breaks my heart, frustrates me all the time, is nobody pays attention. Like, this is one of the most important conversations that people need to have in today's day and age. And I guarantee you right now, look at the view count on this video. I guarantee you it will be absolutely minuscule compared to some other sexier topics about getting rich or whatever that might be, or just boring, mundane, waste of time topics. I also want you to pay attention to the comment section, because I guarantee you the majority of people who will likely comment on this video will be in their 50s and their 60s, because this is a topic which is at the forefront of their mind. And it comes back to what we were talking about before. We're not necessarily programmed in our 20s and our 30s to think 20, 30 years ahead. Even in our 40s, thinking 20 years ahead is difficult. I think, again, it's changing, but at what level? Is the change happening fast enough? That I don't know. And that is one of my biggest frustrations talking about this, because we need the people who are going to be impacted by this, who are going to carry the bag of this, to pay attention and to take action.
Justin thinks the all-encompassing welfare state is over. We simply can't afford it. We're going to need to go back to relying on our families to look after us when we're old or sick, he says.
And now we're having to see cuts into parts of the welfare state, which need to be done. But the figures they're talking about at the moment, it's not major surgery. They're talking about actually putting small patches on a wound. I'm afraid they're going to need wholesale changes to the way we deal with this. Radically reforming the NHS so that it's the NHS to provide services, not for every medical requirement, but for emergency issues and but for longer term health issues. Maybe that's not going to be the answer to it. The government will introduce forms of means testing. Why? Because for those who can afford it, you're going to have to pay for it yourself. And to be able to make sure that that is then being fair and people aren't leeching the system for their own benefit. What I find is so frustrating at the moment is, I'm afraid, the politicians and also individuals, they're putting their blinkers on. They don't want to know about it, which is not surprising because it's not a good story. But you can turn it into a positive story if you just say, here is a way of going forward. And this may sound like a pipe dream, but I've already seen it in action, where families band together and you can see actually how the assets and the cash control is managed over the generations. And that gives you that word of confidence. So yes, you should be fearful at the moment because it's being badly run. We're living beyond our means, and the future is not actually having rosy, greater growth coming through. It's a lower, slower world, which is going to be more expensive.
Do you think there will be a state pension in 30 years?
In 30 years' time, there will be a title which says your state pension. It'll still be there. Don't get excited by the value of it because it will end up being pretty small, I suspect. Why? Because the government can't afford it. So they'll never get rid of the title. What they'll do is say, we can only, every person in this country will be entitled to a basic state pension of X, and it won't be something you could live on. It'll be something which will provide a contribution for. What they need to be able to do, and they have to an extent, but again, people didn't understand it. The more you put in, the more benefit you got out. but no one told you actually how much money do you need to have in your pot for your retirement. And when you do tell them that, they get absolutely terrified because they're talking about £500,000 to £1,000,000. I don't, you couldn't even rob a bank for that much money.
I'm an ex financial advisor. I now do financial coaching with people. And the amount of times that I sit down with people to actually forward plan and map their finances, sometimes and a lot of times into retirement, we talk about how much you're going to need. He's absolutely right. The number oftentimes is £500,000 to £1,000,000. And the reason why it's that number is because even if you use the 4% rule, which many people will say is still flawed, £1,000,000 is going to get you £40,000 per year. Now, is £40,000 a year enough to live on? It would be, and it can be, depending on whether or not you are still renting your own property or you own your own property at that stage in life. And unfortunately, this is where we get into conversations around social media today, because one of the things that I notice online that really, really breaks my heart, and this is again speaking to people who are in their 20s and their 30s, and maybe people in their early 40s, is a lot of people have given up on the idea of owning their own home. And I know that in the rest of Europe, there isn't this obsession of owning your own property, but in the UK, it's different. And as a financial planner, as someone who's sat down with people to plan their retirement, oftentimes the residential home that you live is your biggest asset. And whether or not you funded adequately enough a pension pot or not, in most cases, most people will downsize the house that they paid off over the course of their lifetime to release £200,000, whatever the amount might be, to prop up a pension fund and give them the options for an improved income in retirement. And look, that's just one of the issues. What if they then need later life care? They need to go into a care home because you don't want to go into a government run care home. Do you really? Age 60, 65 with health issues where you need assistance, you want to go into that? Most sane people don't want to do that. And so your home that you live in is one of the biggest assets a lot of people have. And this is where it winds me up, because you hear people like Simon Squibb, Grant Cardone, and a lot of these other social influencers now who are telling young people that it's a waste of time to own the residential home that you live in, that you're working for the bank, that you're wasting time, that you never own the asset, which is absolute baloney. And the cynical thing is that these people who are leading this narrative are all multimillionaires who do not need to own their primary residence as an option to help fund later life care or retirement needs, because they have cash assets or assets that could be converted to cash or generate cash in the long run. They're not in the same position to you. And what I see is a lot of people in their 20s and 30s look up to these guys like they're idols. And people are capitalizing on this. There's this saying that, the person who makes the most money in a gold rush is the person who's selling the shovels. These guys are selling shovels in their own version of a gold rush. And cynically, what I often see is that a lot of these people are the ones who tell these youngsters, don't worry about owning your own home, you just rent. And when you look at where they put their money, they put money into property, renting out to these people. So really, it's quite cynical, because when you look at the entire system and the whole cycle, you're telling young people, do not bother buying your own home, just rent. But who are they renting the properties from? They're buying it from the very guys who have told them not to rent. What does that do? It means that these guys, who are already multimillionaires, the renters that they've created, pay down the mortgages on their properties, making sure that they now have like mortgage-free, debt-free assets which they can go and release for cash and use to buy up more property, more assets later on. It's such a cynical cycle. And look, this is why I say to young people, not that many young people in their 20s and 30s are going to be watching this, but if you are, this is why I kind of say to young people that it is very important to be discerning of the people that you follow online. You've got to understand how what you might be consuming online fits in with your own narrative, fits in with your own circumstances. There is nuance to this, and often the devil is in the detail. Because at the end of the day, the only person who's going to be held accountable for the decisions that you make as a byproduct of the people that you're listening to and the actions that you take is you. These guys like Simon Squibb, when they hit 65 and you're still working your ass off, never having paid off your primary residence because you thought, oh, I'm just going to invest. And we all know that that's all down to building financial habits, which again, people are not interested in. He'll be fine on retirement, but will you? And I think, look, if I'm going to wrap up this video, I just want to really drive home a handful of points. There is no reason for anyone in 2025 not to be contributing into a pension of some kind. If you're employed in the business, you got your workplace pension. Your employer's putting in 3%, you're putting in 5%, you've got 8% going in. Fantastic. If you're not, you're a dummy. I'm sorry, but you just are. You're an absolute dummy. You're robbing yourself. You're doing yourself a disservice. You need to go fix that with HR tomorrow, and get yourself enrolled in. If you are self-employed, well, look, I understand how difficult it is as a business owner. You're constantly thinking about how you're going to grow the business if you're paying staff, making sure that you've got your staff costs covered and your overhead covers, VAT, corporation tax. There are so many things that you have to constantly think about. It's stressful. It's hard. It's difficult. I know that because I run my own business as well. But again, you have to try and prioritize the fact that your business is there to try and fund your personal life as well. And within a business, you can make pension contributions that will reduce your corporation tax. So you really need to try and treat it as a standard business expense and use that as a way to at least help you build some form of pension from your business. Now, a lot of providers will take contributions from a company. Some won't. If that is the case and you're really, really struggling, Nest is probably a great place to start if you're a business owner. Now, not that Nest is the best provider out there, their funds don't really perform that well, but it will allow you to accumulate some level of funds, which you can later transfer into a Vanguard or to a pension bee or whoever it might be. But you have to get started. You have to consider it and account for it as a business expense, which will help you reduce your corporation tax. The other thing I've kind of already alluded on it is property ownership. If you're in your 20s and your 30s, please, please, please. I know that it is difficult to figure out what you're going to do. Most of you may have come out of university with university debt. Some of you may have external debts outside your student loans and stuff. Now you got to think about how you're going to save for a deposit to get on the poverty ladder. I know that it's hard, but it's not impossible. People are buying properties every day. And so it just takes some planning. But what I'm trying to say here is that if you resign to this idea that you're not going to buy your property, then you 100% need to make sure you have the financial fundamentals in place. This is the boring stuff that I've been preaching and talking about here on the channel, which is not popular for the past 5 years. It's what I talk about in my book. You need to make sure that you're not bogged down in trying to impress your peers, in scrupulous spending, in keeping up with the Joneses, in mindlessly just spending money because you've got to do this, or you feel that you've got to impress, or you feel that you should be here. Everything is based on, and everything should be based on what you want. And I know that's hard to ascertain if you're in your 20s and your 30s, particularly if you're in your 20s. But the sooner you get these principles in place, the better it's going to be for you. You have to learn how to invest early, and not just learn how to invest, but execute on investment securely, safely, and consistently. Really, really important. I cannot stress that enough. Investing is not a quick rich get rich quick scheme. Yes, you can have a look at trading. Just do trading separately. That can be your plan B, but you need to be able to invest over the long term. Learn how to execute it safely, consistently. You really have to understand that. And that might mean making some financial sacrifices, not going out for a curry, not going out to, the club or to a bar with your friends once a month. It's really understanding what your income and expenditure is and creating a pot of money which will allow you to invest consistently. It's really, really important. But in an ideal world, get on the poverty ladder, get that thing paid off over the course of your lifetime, because for a lot of people, and I mention this again, for a lot of people, it's going to end up being their largest asset. There is a lot of narrative at the moment saying, no, if you own your own property, then, you're stuck, you can't do anything. You can move. You can sell it. And all the while, as long as the property is appreciated in value, you'll have some money which you can take out to either cycle back into another property or invest into the market. It's not as much of a waste of time as the likes of Simon Squibb, Grant Cardone, and even to a certain extent Ramit Sethi. And Ramit Sethi does a great job, does great work. It's not as bad as what these guys are saying. They'll talk to you about the cost of home ownership. When have you ever bought anything that doesn't cost you money? People buy cars that depreciate in value, that you've got to put petrol in it, maintenance, you've got to fix the tires. It's a running cost, but people will happily go out and buy an extremely expensive car. Why? Because it's an ego boost. What's the biggest flex? Owning the home that you live in or driving a really nice freaking car that is going to depreciate in value? We need to get our head straight. I mean, honestly, it really fucking pisses me off sometimes, the social media narratives that we hear oftentimes. And I'm swearing because I want to make the point. And sometimes you can't make the point politely. So you need stronger language sometimes to make this point. The last thing that I've written down here is financial acumen. And I've already kind of touched on that in that last point. You need to figure out how you're going to master your money, how you're going to master your financial habits, and grow financial habits that are conducive to you creating wealth in the long term. Because believe me, you're going to need that wealth. You are going to need that wealth later on in life. And you may be in your 20s and your 30s thinking you've got time. I thought that. But the fortunate thing is, I'm 45 now. It feels like yesterday I was 20, 25 with my mates having a good time. Time flies. It sneaks up on you like wrinkles. 1 minute they're there, 1 minute they're not. Now, look, I'd love to hear what you think in the comment section down below. I will ask one thing of you. I'm pretty sure that no one in their 20s and 30s is really going to pay attention to this. If I look at the audience demographics on the analytics of this video, I guarantee you it's going to be 50, 60-year-olds. So if you are 50, 60-year-old watching this video and you have a family member, kid, child, grandchild in their 20s, 30s, please share this video so that they can actually listen to this conversation. This is a big problem. And if we don't act as individuals, mass poverty in retirement is going to be a big, big problem. So there it is. I want to wish you good luck because trust me, you're going to need it.